Good evening, ladies. I have read your integrative literature part one and provided you feedback in the rubric. It is important that regardless of your grade, even if you were highly successful, that you go in and you read the feedback that's been provided. There's lots of recommendations for everyone to look at from their integrative literature review. If you started this process and you felt really overwhelmed and you weren't really sure exactly what you were doing, know that you're in good company. An integrative literature review is complex, and if you've not done it before, it can feel a little unwieldy when you first start doing it. It's the reason that I've told you for the past few weeks to get part one right before you start part two. If you have a well-developed research question with a clearly defined blueprint for your research, everything else falls in line. But if your research question is too broad or too narrow or not on topic, you're going to get lost very quickly. If your research methods are vague or they're not at a level of scholarly process, you're going to struggle with finding scholarly results. So go back in and make sure that you've reviewed the feedback and that you're integrating the change in part one before you start part two. Please know that when you submit part two in week 5 of this course, you're going to start writing where you left off in part one. I'm going to start reading at the very beginning of your title page. I'm going to reread part one, and it should flow like a congruent, consistent paper. So when you're writing part two, make sure you do the same thing. The idea is not to create a fragmented paper that looks like it was written at 3 different intervals, but a paper that was thoughtfully developed and congruently written. From a writing syntax standpoint, I would like to remind you that when you are writing at a graduate level, when you're writing at a level that would be likely to be published, your sentences should be clear and succinct. I struggle with flowery writing. If I can put as much possible between the capital letter and the period, I am super excited. I have been told repeatedly by publishers to stop doing that. You want your readers to read something and have immediate clarity in what you mean. The fact that you can craft a 4-line grammatically correct sentence is not the goal. The goal is clarity. So if you have a compound sentence that has lots of commas and semicolons, break it out into 2 or 3 sentences instead of lengthy, complex sentences. You want your ideas to be clear. There are times that you're just gonna have long sentences, but if that's a pattern for you, you want to move away from that and develop clear, succinct sentences. I want to remind you that good paragraphs have 3 to 5 sentences, and those 3 to 5 sentences need to be supportive of the content in the paragraph. With this integrative literature review, you've only done part one. You should have used level 1 and level 2 headings by now. If you haven't, I want you to go back in and think about how you can integrate those as you move forward. As you move forward into part 2, you're going to need to add a level 3 heading to break up and guide your reader. This is to help organize your own thinking, but also to guide your reader. So as you move through this paper, make sure that you're using level 1, level 2, and level 3 headings correctly. You're not likely to use level 4 headings unless you get into a really large section of your analysis. Know that that's not my expectation, but level 3 is. So level 1 and level 2 now, level 3 should be added in your next section. I want to remind you, when you do your literature review, when you're actually in the literature, you have provided me part 1 of your integrative literature process. You've told me what keywords you're going to use, what search parameters, like whether you're going to use English, what your population, if you're targeting a population, what years you're going to use, whether you're going to include quantitative and qualitative or both, or whether you're going to be specific about design at all. Whatever you have said in part 1 needs to be your process when you go into the literature to do your literature review. If you go into your literature review and you begin to have trouble finding articles and you need to make minor adjustments to part 1, know that that's not uncommon. What you want to do is whatever comes in part 1, if you say this is my method and how I'm going to do this, part 2 needs to be exactly what you did. As a researcher, I should be able to take your blueprint from part one and duplicate it and find the same things you found. If you are not consistent, if you do part one and then get excited and start wandering off and not following with strict adherence to your plan, you're going to get results that can't be duplicated, and it will question the veracity of your findings. The only way to say that your integrative literature answers your questions is if you are very precise in your methodology. You can't get into the literature, get too excited, and then get lost. Stay focused. So, okay, the other thing, running headers, they need to be short and succinct and relevant to your topic. Running headers are used by publications and databases to locate topics. So if your topic is an integrative literature review, and that's as detailed as you want it to be, that's okay. It may be more succinct to look at your a running head of being simulation in undergraduate students. That may be more relevant to the actual topic of your paper. It's up to you, but it should be descriptive. At a minimum, your paper title needs to be descriptive. It needs to say what type of paper it is, and my suggestion would be to put that it's a systematic literature review or an integrative literature review, and then the general topic of what that is. Page 2 should have the title of your paper as the level heading 1 on page 2, so that that's where you begin your paper. However you want to do this, just make sure that your paper title tells me what's in there. It's okay if you don't want to polish that until part 3. Just know in part 3, your paper needs to say descriptively from a title standpoint exactly what your paper's about. Okay, I think those are my notes about... Oh, let's talk a little bit about sources. When you go in to do your integrative literature review, make sure that you are avoiding gray literature. And those would be unpublished dissertations. They would be commentaries, editorials, opinion pieces, and you'll normally know that this is the case if there are 1 or 2 pages and there's not a lot of data to support it. You want to avoid those in an integrative literature review. The other thing you're going to want to avoid is the use of existing systematic literature reviews. I know that's going to make you crazy because when you look at your levels of evidence, it's the gold standard. It's the thing that we all, when we're making a clinical decision, we're going to go look for a systematic literature review because it's likely to give us a really good summary about what's out in the literature. Here's the reason you're not going to use it. It's doing your job for you. It's already giving you a roll-up of your topic. I don't want you looking at roll-ups of your topic or summaries of your topics. I want you to be dealing with primary sources only. And a systematic literature review, when it's done well, is an analysis of primary sources and becomes a secondary source. So you want to avoid those. If you get really stuck for sources and you found a systematic literature review, there's a way to use that systematic literature review from going through its reference list to find the primary sourced articles and go back in and find those primary articles and then read them for relevance and then decide whether to include them. If you use kind of that backdoor research approach, you need to claim it in your methodology so that people know that you use that method. It's not a fabulous approach. It's not the most scholarly. It's done. But you want to avoid that as much as possible. At a minimum, a systematic literature review should not be included in your analysis of your topic. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about, I know several of you are looking at starting part 2 already, and that is wise. You want to get moving on this. When you start looking at part 2, you want to make sure you're using scholarly sources, you're avoiding the gray literature. You want to make sure that as you're writing your paper and you are creating a reference list, that you audit your reference list carefully. Because you're going to have a pretty lengthy reference list, you want to make sure that what you have put in your paper and what is on your reference list are congruent. If you add things to your reference list and they are not in your paper, that's a type of plagiarism. It's basically what we would consider padding a reference list, and that's not okay. So at each interval of your writing of your paper, make sure that if it is on your, if it's on your matrix, if it's on your reference list that it needs to be actually cited in your paper. So make sure that when you are done, print off your reference list and just go through your paper and check them all off. That's one of the best ways to avoid making that mistake. And it is a mistake that I see regularly. So, and it's not because someone's doing something intentional, it's because it's a little overwhelming and it just becomes unwieldy. So make it one of those checkpoint things that you do. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it on the integrative literature review. The last thing I want to talk about is for week 4. You know that you guys know how to write your practicum logs. The only thing I will caution you is to make sure that you have gone back in your Typhon time log and made sure that your roll-up column is giving all of the previously acquired hours. You cannot graduate unless that column says that you have 200 hours. So make sure that that column is corrected before you add the hours for 620. If for some reason there's a hiccup and there's a problem, work with Faith Sterling to get those corrected. But that is a requirement for graduation. The other thing to remember as a step, one of your artifacts in your portfolio is to provide a list. You can use your primary document that you submitted for your goals and objectives in 618, and you're going to use that and get a date of when you have completed each of your goals and objectives. So before you get too far down in your work of your practicum for your last course, you probably want to go back through and audit your own practicum logs to make sure that you have met all of your goals and objectives, and check them off and write down the dates, because you are going to need to submit that as an artifact that's required prior to graduation. We have to know that you've done what you said you were going to do. Okay. Your portfolio is also due. Make sure that when you do your portfolio, you're required to set up some goals for 1, 5, and 10 years. When you set up a goal, be careful, be thoughtful in how you develop a goal, and then provide several, normally I would say 2 to 3 measurable steps for how you'll accomplish the goal that you've stated. So just be very thoughtful in what that goal is and make sure that it's attainable and that you can measure it. And the last thing is with professional development, you're going to go through the past 5 years, list them in chronological order. And this would be things that you have attended for professional development or continuous learning, things that have helped you maintain your level of excellence in education and credentialing. If you know the CEUs that were associated with the course that you attended, make sure to put that. It's not required, but it's helpful to know, how long something was. And then make sure the date is required. So you need to put all the dates of any professional development that you've had. So many of you keep up with that for work and for promotions and types of stuff. So you can just put that into your portfolio. I think of what I was talking about. Okay, I think that is all I have. I know I have rambled a little bit. I hope you all have a wonderful Holy Week, that you have a blessed Easter, that you are humbled and amazed by God's grace and glory and the gift of our salvation. This is probably, I think in my opinion, the most meaningful spiritual week in the entire calendar. I love Christmas, but Easter's where it's at. So I hope that you feel blessed by this week, and that it is a week full of blessings for you. If you're living a good life, then not only is Easter a wonderful spiritual, religious experience, but there may be a peep or a chocolate bunny in an Easter basket for you. It is always my annual hope to see peeps. Okay, touch base with questions or concerns. Happy to work through them with you. And just know that I will be looking forward to your work as the week wraps up. You guys take care.